They sat me by the kitchen. That was where I watched my son get married through a narrow swinging door and the fog of steam from a tray of shrimp cocktail I'd paid for myself. No one told me where to go when I arrived. There was no name card, no kind word, just a folding chair wedged between a stack of trays and a service cart with a broken wheel that squeaked whenever someone pushed it past. That was my place in the story, invisible, necessary, and unwanted. My name is Nora Bennett, and if you've made it this far, I'm glad you're here. Give this story a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far truth can travel, because the one I'm about to tell you tore through my family like a wildfire that refused to die. The air smelled of marinara and perfume and something else, disappointment, maybe. The heat from the ovens pressed against my back. I could feel sweat collecting at the base of my neck, dampening the soft mauve chiffon dress I'd saved for months to buy. 3 hours at the salon that morning, 3 hours convincing myself that if I looked like I belonged, perhaps I would. Through the crack of the door, I could see the ballroom shimmer under golden light. My son, Daniel, stood at the head table, handsome and careful in his navy suit, adjusting his cufflinks while her mother kissed his cheek. The woman smiled like she'd raised him herself, like she'd been the one who sang to him through his night terrors, who pawned her wedding ring to buy him braces. She wasn't. But in that moment, she wore my years like a borrowed crown. I clutched my small beige handbag, the one Daniel gave me years ago for Mother's Day, back when he still called me Mama. My hands shook, not from rage, from the trembling ache of holding in too much kindness for too long. A young catering manager appeared beside me, a boy, barely 20, with nervous eyes and a tie knotted too tight. "Ma'am," he said gently, "they asked if you could wait back here. The bride didn't want, any visual clashes with the theme." He winced. The words sounded rehearsed, borrowed from someone else's mouth. "Theme?" I repeated. The syllable felt heavy on my tongue. He nodded, helpless. "It's for the photos. You know, aesthetic consistency." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Behind him, the silver edge of the kitchen door swung open again, striking the wall with a metallic clang. Music spilled through laughter, the clinking of glasses, the rhythm of joy I had paid for but was not invited to share. Saturday. The chair groaned beneath me. The tile floor was sticky where gravy had spilled and dried. A cold chicken breast sat on a chipped plate in front of me. My reflection in the dull silver of the tray above looked older, smaller, almost translucent. For a moment, I thought about standing up, walking out, making a scene. But a quiet voice whispered inside me, "Don't ruin this for him. Don't be that mother." So I folded my hands, pressed my napkin to my lap, and stayed. When the music swelled for the first dance, I turned slightly and caught a glimpse through the door. Daniel and Emily twirling beneath the chandelier, faces radiant. He didn't look toward the kitchen once. I smiled anyway. It felt like muscle memory, a reflex from years of pretending everything was fine. The scent of garlic butter mingled with the smell of my perfume, the one I'd bought on clearance last Christmas. My eyes burned. I told myself it was the onions from the kitchen, not the betrayal curdling inside me. I pulled the church program from my purse cream cardstock. Elegant script. No mention of me. Her father walked her down the aisle. Her mother gave the first toast. My name existed nowhere, not even in the ink. I looked down at my hands again, the same hands that once held Daniel through fever and fear, the same hands that scrubbed hospital floors to pay for college applications. They were trembling, the way a power line hums after a storm, alive but uncertain. From beyond the door, laughter rippled through the hall again. I imagined the light shimmering on the gold chairs, the band tuning for another song. I could almost hear the clink of Emily's champagne glass as she leaned in for a kiss that would be photographed from a dozen perfect angles. My own reflection wavered in the metal trays around me, a woman blurred by steam and noise, fading at the edges. Something in me gave a soft, almost inaudible crack. Not a shatter, just the beginning of one. I pressed my palms flat against my knees and closed my eyes. "Breathe," I told myself. If I cried now, I wouldn't stop. So I didn't. Instead, I listened. To the clatter of plates, the muffled laughter, the faint vibration of music through the walls. Every sound reminded me where I wasn't and where I still could be, if I chose differently. When the song ended, the applause echoed like distant thunder. Someone shouted for the next toast. I sat very still, feeling the pulse of life on the other side of that door, a life I had built but no longer belonged to. And in that silence, Amid the hum of ovens and the hiss of steam, something inside me shifted. A thought, small but steady, whispered through the noise. Maybe this is not the end of being left out. Maybe it's the beginning of stepping away. I looked up at the tiny square window above the sink, the only light in the room. Outside, the sky had turned a soft amber, the sun dipping low behind the trees. It bathed the kitchen in a fragile glow, catching the edges of every stainless steel surface until even the broken cart seemed to shimmer. For the first time that day, I wasn't looking through the door at the celebration. I was looking through the window at the light. I didn't move yet, didn't plan revenge, didn't make a call. I just sat there, in the warmth of that fading sun, feeling something return that I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not anger, just the faint, trembling outline of myself. There's a strange kind of blindness that comes from love, the kind that keeps you walking toward the edge even when the signs all say, stop. For a year, I lived in that blindness. Every Friday after my hospital shifts, I'd sit at the small oak table in my kitchen, balancing spreadsheets and receipts like a penitent nun counting rosary beads. The florist's invoice, the cake deposit, the venue upgrade, they all had my handwriting on them, neat and hopeful. Every note began with the same phrase. For Daniel's happiness. Emily, his fiancée, had a way of saying elevated that sounded like a command. We want something a little more elevated, Nora, she'd say, brushing an invisible speck off her manicured hand. It's not about money, it's about the experience. But it was about money. It always was. When she wanted calligraphed invitations from a boutique in Vermont, I said yes. When she swapped the church hall for a barn with chandeliers and gold-rimmed glasses, I said yes again. I told myself this was what love looked like, saying yes until you disappeared. Daniel would call every so often, his voice quick and distracted, always ending the same way. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. And I believed him. God help me. I believed him. The first time I met Emily's parents, I wore a navy dress and hope. Her mother, Susan, smiled like someone smelling something faintly unpleasant. Her father shook my hand and said, "We really admire your perseverance. Raising Daniel on your own must have been hard." Perseverance. Like my life had been an obstacle course they admired from the sidelines. I should have known then, but instead, I offered to cover the rehearsal dinner. "It's what mothers do," I said. They didn't argue. Every upgrade, every little change, chipped away at something inside me. I told myself it didn't matter, that the joy on Daniel's face would make it worth it. I even told my sister Carol once, if I can give him one perfect day, I can live off that memory forever. She'd only said, just make sure they leave room for you at that perfect day. I laughed then. I shouldn't have. The closer the wedding came, the smaller I felt. My role shrank from mother of the groom to financial sponsor to uninvited observer. The last planning meeting I attended, they barely noticed when I left. I remember standing in the parking lot outside the venue, the late summer air thick with the smell of pine and dust, thinking, I paid for this silence. On the night before the wedding, I stayed up hemming my dress. I ironed it 3 times, careful with the seams. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in their photographs. When I went to bed, I whispered a prayer not for gratitude, not even for respect, just to be seen. But when I arrived the next day, there was no name card, no seat, just that chair by the kitchen door and a paper napkin folded like an afterthought. And yet, I smiled, because I'd promised myself, don't ruin it for him. I sat in that kitchen because a mother's love can endure what her pride cannot. But now, looking back, I wonder, was it love or fear? Fear that if I stopped giving, I'd have nothing left that was mine. That year, I bought every flower, every fork, every shimmer of light for a celebration I wasn't part of. And in doing so, I purchased the lesson of a lifetime that sometimes the only way to be invited into your own story again is to finally stop paying for someone else's. The door swung again, a silver blur, a clang, a burst of laughter spilling through the crack like champagne fizzing over a glass. The sound struck something deep inside me. I turned my head just slightly, and for a heartbeat, I saw it all. The ballroom glittered beneath chandeliers I had rented. The gold chairs I'd upgraded shimmered in perfect symmetry. And there, in the center, was Daniel, my boy, my once small miracle, smiling the way I hadn't seen since he was 10 years old. His hand rested on Emily's back, as they twirled under soft amber light. They looked perfect, glowing, complete. And I was the missing piece that made the picture beautiful. He didn't look toward the kitchen once. Not once. A warmth gathered behind my eyes, but I refused to let it fall. Instead, I pressed the linen napkin to my mouth as if I were blotting lipstick, pretending I wasn't disappearing by the second. The catering staff rushed past, a blur of trays, laughter, grease-stained aprons. One young waitress paused when she saw me. Her face flushed, sympathy flickering like a candle's flame. "Do you need anything, ma'am? A drink?" I managed a small smile. "I'm fine," but I wasn't. Not even close. Everywhere I looked, something of me existed. The flowers, the centerpieces, the silk runners. Every corner of that room carried my fingerprints, and yet no one saw me. I had built a cathedral of love and been locked outside its doors. I caught a glimpse through the doorway again. The bride's mother, Susan, with her pearls and perfect posture, leaned close to Daniel. She said something that made him laugh. That laugh, that deep, full laugh that used to belong only to me. I felt my hands tremble in my lap. The tremor wasn't from rage, but from recognition, the kind that comes when truth finally stops whispering and starts screaming. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Emily's gaze met mine through the half-opened door. For a moment, time stood still. She saw me. She knew where I was tucked in the shadow behind the ovens, the forgotten benefactor, and then she smiled. A calm, satisfied smile. Not cruel, not mocking worse. It was natural, as if this was how the world was meant to be. I turned away, the breath catching in my throat. It was such a small gesture, that smile, but it closed a chapter years in the making. No one had forced Daniel to forget me. He had simply learned how to live without needing me visible. The speech started. Her father's voice boomed like thunder. "To our daughter, Emily, and her perfect husband, Daniel, may you always have joy and laughter in your home." Applause burst like a wave. I pressed my palms flat on the table to steady myself. When Emily's mother took the microphone next, her voice was honeyed and false. "We're so grateful to welcome Daniel into our family. He's like a second son to us already." Another cheer. No mention of me. Second son. No mother. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. My jaw ached. My heart did not break loudly. It caved inward, quietly like a house sinking into itself after years of rot. Then came Daniel's turn. He looked radiant under the lights, confident, strong, a stranger wearing my child's face. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he began. "Emily, you've made me the happiest man alive. And to your family, thank you for welcoming me like your own." His voice was smooth, practiced. I waited for it. For my name. For even a glance in my direction. It never came. He thanked everyone who helped make today possible. Everyone. And I was no one. I didn't move when the applause came again, didn't flinch when the music swelled. I just sat there, a ghost in a mauve dress, holding still while the world celebrated my absence. A slice of cake appeared in front of me, placed by another kind-eyed waitress. Vanilla, with raspberry filling, Emily's favorite. I stared at it for a long time. The frosting perfect, the color pristine. I thought of Daniel's 10th birthday, the chocolate cake I worked 2 extra shifts to buy, the one he said was the best ever. I'd lit 10 candles that night. He'd made a wish and whispered it to me, "Don't ever leave me, Mama." And now, he had left me first with no seat, no name, no acknowledgement. I set down the fork. The hum of the ballroom grew louder through the wall. Laughter, music, life. It all kept going, and I sat there, quiet, waiting for the ache to fade. But it didn't fade. It clarified. I looked at the cold chicken, the melting cake, the empty chair beside me, and I understood something that hurt and healed at once. Silence was not kindness. It was surrender. I had been kind for too long. And though I didn't yet know what I'd do, I felt the smallest spark flicker inside me, fragile but certain. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was awareness. The first breath of a woman who'd finally realized she could stand up. When the last toast ended and the laughter blurred into the dull throb of bass through the kitchen walls, I stood up. Slowly. My knees cracked, my shoes stuck slightly to the tile, and the air smelled of burnt butter and exhaustion. I looked down at the half-eaten cake untouched, except for one neat line where the fork had sunk in and realized something simple. No one was coming for me. No one was going to open that door and say, "Mom, where are you? You should be out here." The only person left to rescue me was me. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now, surprisingly steady. The tremor that had haunted me earlier had gone quiet, replaced by something calm, measured, certain. The first number I dialed was the florist. "Hi, this is Nora Bennett. I'm calling to cancel tomorrow's delivery for the brunch arrangement. Yes, the payment balance will be withheld per our agreement. Thank you for your understanding." Click. The second was the band. "Due to changes in the event schedule, we won't be needing your second performance. Please consider the contract closed." Click. The third, the open bar. "This is Nora Bennett again. The cocktail service for the post-reception event can be canceled. No issues, just a change of heart." Click. 3 calls, 3 closures. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain myself. When I hung up, I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching my reflection ghost across the glass, a woman who finally realized she didn't have to scream to be heard. Power, I learned that night, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly under your skin, the low thrum of an engine starting after years of disuse. Outside the kitchen, the band struck up another song, one I'd requested during the planning, a slow waltz that reminded me of the first time I'd danced with Daniel at his high school graduation. They didn't know it was my song. They didn't care. I stood near the door and watched them sway under the lights. Her father beaming, her mother preening. My son, my child, moving through their world like he'd been born to it. He looked happy, and I let that image etch itself into me not as a wound, but as a monument to everything I had given. I didn't feel anger, not yet, only an odd, lucid calm, the kind that comes after a long fever breaks. When the night ended and guests drifted out into the cool dark, I slipped through the service exit. The air outside was still and damp, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every breath taste like rain. I looked up. The stars were dim behind a veil of clouds. I couldn't remember the last time I'd really looked at the sky. The hotel was quiet when I reached my room. I didn't undress. The mauve chiffon wrinkled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glowing red numbers of the digital clock, 12:37. I replayed the day in fragments, the napkin on the chair, the boy's nervous voice, Daniel's smile directed elsewhere. Each image sharpened, then softened, until they began to blur together into one long truth. I had built an entire world for people who had already decided they could live without me. Somewhere between midnight and morning, the numbness gave way to clarity. I realized that all those years of giving every double shift, every canceled vacation, every bill quietly paid, hadn't made me indispensable. It had made me invisible, and invisibility, once recognized, becomes unbearable. I picked up my phone again, scrolled through the endless string of unread messages, names I'd once loved, glowing cold against the screen. Daniel, Emily, her mother, my niece. All of them wanting explanations. I turned the phone face down. Tomorrow, there would be chaos. There would be calls, panic, questions. But tonight, there was silence. And in that silence, I felt something almost sacred. Not revenge, not triumph, just release. The kind of peace that only comes after you stop begging to be seen. I took a deep breath, leaned back against the headboard, and let the quiet hold me. The night didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. I didn't sleep. Not a minute. The ceiling fan spun slow circles above me, each rotation slicing the silence into quarters. Outside, the hum of traffic faded until even the city seemed to hold its breath. My dress clung to my skin. The perfume I'd chosen that morning, gardenia, delicate and hopeful, had soured into something heavy and wrong. The phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Messages. Missed calls. Daniel. Mom, what happened? Everyone's freaking out. Emily. Please call me back. The band just left. Susan. This is incredibly unprofessional. Guests are asking questions. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then turned it face down. I'd spent my life answering everyone else's calls. Tonight, the silence was my answer. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen washing the room in cold light. My hands knew where to go. The spreadsheet I'd kept for months, neat rows of numbers and names, each line a promise I'd paid for. Florist, venue, photographer, bar tab, a living archive of sacrifice. Scrolling through, I noticed 2 new entries, both charged to my account. One was from the Copper Elm, a high-end bistro in town rehearsal dinner upgrade. The other, the Clover Lounge, a tasting event bar tab for 8. Both unauthorized. Both paid with my card. And then, a Venmo note screenshot from a bridesmaid's story, still visible in cached memory. His mom's covering everything. Might as well go big. Number wedding vibes. I stared at those words until my throat closed. His mom. Not Nora, not her mother-in-law, just a wallet with a pulse. I thought I might cry, but nothing came. There's a moment after a long pain where even grief refuses to rise, where your body, mercifully, goes quiet to protect itself. I stood, crossed the room, and turned on the lamp. In the mirror above the desk, a stranger looked back at me. Smudged mascara, lips pale, the softness in my face replaced by something sharper. I didn't look broken, I looked awake. I washed my face, brushed out my hair, and sat down at the desk again. The stillness in that room was almost holy. I drafted 3 emails. To the florist. Please confirm cancellation of tomorrow's delivery. Balance withheld. Thank you for your time. To the band. The second performance is no longer required. Appreciate your professionalism. To the bar service. Please cancel the extended shift. No further payment will be processed. Regards. Nora Bennett. Each message polite. Firm. Final. When I hit send, a strange lightness filled my chest. Not joy exactly, but relief, the kind you feel when a fever finally breaks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I walked to the window. Dawn was bleeding into the horizon, the sky the color of bruised violets. Down below, the hotel courtyard was littered with the remains of celebration napkins caught in hedges, champagne bottles left half full, the remnants of joy I'd purchased. I pressed my hand against the glass, cool and steady. Let them figure it out, I whispered to no one. Somewhere out there, they were waking to the mess. They'd wonder why the brunch flowers never arrived, why the music stopped early, why the bar ran dry. Maybe, for a moment, Daniel would think of me not as an afterthought, but as the reason everything had existed in the first place. I didn't expect apology. I didn't even want it. What I wanted was this: quiet, complete autonomy. I sat back down on the bed, the sheets still crisp and untouched, and watched the light grow stronger across the floor. I hadn't felt this awake in decades. The day was beginning, and for once, it wasn't built on anyone else's happiness but mine. By the time I reached home, the sun had already begun to fade, spilling its last light across the street like a sigh. The house looked smaller than I remembered, quiet, too neat, waiting. I left my suitcase by the door and walked straight to my bedroom, still in the same jeans and shirt I'd thrown on that morning. The walls felt closer, as if the air itself was listening. For a long while, I just stood there, staring at the dresser. The second drawer on the left stuck halfway it always had. I gave it a gentle nudge with my hip, and it slid open with its familiar groan. Inside, beneath a pile of old tax forms and photographs curled at the edges, was the red folder. I hadn't touched it in years. The paper had softened, almost velvety from time, and the edges had begun to fray. It had been there since before Daniel moved away, since before the wedding planning swallowed my life whole. I sat on the bed, the folder in my lap, and opened it. Bills, receipts, a letter, the one I had never read. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded, the handwriting immediately recognizable. Michael's, my late husband, the man who'd walked out of our lives 2 decades ago and left me to raise a boy on my own. I'd found it weeks after he died, postmarked from Arizona. I hadn't had the heart to open it then. I was still angry, still grieving. But tonight, something in me needed to. The paper crackled softly as I slid it free. Nora, I know you never wanted to hear from me again, and I don't blame you. But there's something I can't take with me. You deserve the truth. Daniel isn't biologically yours. I found out years ago, after you and I were already together. I should have told you, but I didn't know how. The woman, she left town before he was born. I thought I could love him enough for both of us. I thought I could make it right. But lies have a way of growing roots, and this one has strangled everything. I'm sorry, Nora. I really am. The words blurred. I blinked hard until they cleared. My heartbeat echoed in my throat. Not Mina. My Daniel, the boy whose laugh filled every corner of my life, whose fevers I'd cooled with wet cloths, whose knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid one shift at a time, was not mine by blood. A sound escaped me, small and breathless. Not a sob. Something lower, older, like a deep crack in stone. I set the letter down beside me. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, the world shrank to a single thread of sound, the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. I could have torn the letter. I could have screamed, cursed him, cursed fate, cursed the universe for the cruelty of it. But instead, I sat very still, my hands flat against my thighs. Because beneath the shock was something else, something quieter. Clarity. I had spent my whole life proving I was enough for a child who never truly belonged to me. And I had done it. Every smile, every birthday candle, every scraped knee healed beneath my care. I had raised him, loved him, shaped him. The bloodline was irrelevant. The bond was real. It didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it made it smaller, somehow contained. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the red folder. My hands didn't shake this time. The house was still silent, but it no longer felt oppressive. The quiet had changed. It wasn't emptiness now, but space wide. Open space where grief could breathe. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, black and strong. The bitter scent filled the air. I sat by the window, watching the neighbor's sprinkler tick-tick-tick across the lawn, droplets catching the last of the daylight like small prisms. I thought of Daniel's wedding again, of how I'd watched him dance through the glass, unreachable. And then I thought of all the nights I'd spent awake beside his hospital bed, holding his tiny hand, whispering, "Mama's here. It's okay." He might not be mine by birth, but I had been his in every way that mattered. That realization didn't hurt, it healed. Like air finally reaching a wound that had been bandaged too long. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for this kind of truth. Only understanding and an unexpected peace rising in its place. Because for the first time in my life, I saw the difference between loving someone and losing yourself to them. And I knew which one I would choose from now on. It happened 3 days later. The rain had passed overnight, leaving the world rinsed and glistening. I woke to a streak of sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor like a quiet invitation. The red folder still sat where I had left it, its corners curled as if it had been breathing in the dark. I told myself I was done with it, that one confession from the grave was enough. But grief has a way of whispering when you try to turn away. I opened it again. Inside, tucked so flat against the back sleeve that it almost looked part of the lining, was another letter. No envelope this time. Just one page, folded in thirds, my name written across the top in the same familiar hand. I hesitated, my fingers hovering above the crease. For a moment, I wasn't sure I wanted more truth. The first letter had cracked something open. I wasn't sure I could survive another fracture. But the weight of it, the knowledge that he'd written one more thing he couldn't say aloud, pulled me in. The paper was thinner. The ink hurried, almost desperate. "Nora, if you're reading this, then the first letter reached you. I prayed you'd forgive me, but I can't rest until you know the whole story. Daniel wasn't just someone else's child. He was never supposed to be yours at all. The girl who gave birth to him, her name was Emily, too. She was only 18, terrified, with no one to turn to. She asked me to take him to the agency, said she couldn't keep him. But I couldn't do it. I saw him and I thought of you, how kind you were, how strong. I told myself if anyone could love a child like that, it would be you. So I brought him home. I told you he was ours, and you believed me, because you wanted to believe in us. You raised him with a grace I didn't deserve. You made him your world, Nora. You gave him everything. He will never understand what you sacrificed, but I do. And if there's any mercy left for me, it's knowing that my greatest lie gave that boy the best mother he could have had." The words trembled in my hands. Not only was Daniel not mine, he had never been meant to be anyone's. A discarded child given to me out of guilt and cowardice. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. The house blurred around me, the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind against the glass, all fading into one long pulse. But beneath the shock, another truth surfaced, stronger and deeper than the pain. He might have been left behind by others, but not by me. I thought of the first time I held him, tiny fists curled, breath soft against my neck. The way he'd look up at me when he couldn't sleep, trusting, unguarded. I remembered his laughter echoing through the backyard sprinklers, the nights I'd fallen asleep in a hospital chair beside him. I hadn't failed him. I had fulfilled something sacred. Michael's betrayal no longer felt like an ending, it felt like a release. He had given me a truth that set me free. I wasn't bound by blood or by obligation. I had already done the hardest part, loved without condition, and survived the loss that followed. The paper slipped from my hands onto the table. The sunlight caught the ink, turning it the color of rust. I sat there for a long time, my palms pressed against the cool wood, feeling my pulse slow, even out. The bitterness that had followed me like a shadow these past weeks began to dissolve. I realized I didn't need to be angry anymore, not at Michael, not at Daniel, not even at Emily, because I had done the one thing none of them had the courage to do. I had stayed. I rose and opened the back door. The air smelled of rain and earth, sharp and clean. My roses were blooming wild, defiant, alive. The petals glistened with droplets that caught the morning light, each one a tiny mirror reflecting a woman I was only beginning to recognize. I whispered into the garden, not to anyone, but to the space between grief and grace. You were never mine, Daniel, but I was always yours, and now I'm mine again. The breeze lifted the page on the table behind me, flipping it once, as if in acknowledgement. Then it stilled. That night, I walked through the house as if I were touring a stranger's life. The air smelled faintly of dust and old lavender. The walls carried the soft echo of laughter that hadn't lived here in years. Everywhere I looked was proof of the woman I had been, the mother who existed for someone else's story. The framed photographs on the hallway wall. Daniel in his Little League uniform. Daniel at graduation. Daniel with the keys to his first car. My own face hovered at the edges of every frame, always smiling, always half out of focus. I reached up and touched the photo from his high school ceremony, the one where his arm hung just an inch away from my shoulder, as if even then he were already learning the art of distance. The glass was cool beneath my fingers. In the living room, the couch sagged in the same place. It always had the imprint of the years I spent waiting up for him to come home, the late nights I pretended not to worry. On the side table sat a chipped mug that read, "Hasson, Mom," a gift from second grade. The letters fading but still legible. I traced them with my thumb, and a small, sad smile found me. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. The kitchen was the hardest. The refrigerator still held his favorite cereal, Honey Bunches of Oats, though I hadn't eaten it in years. The magnets on the door still pinned up his childhood drawings, crooked houses, stick figures, hearts, labeled Mom plus me. I left them there for a moment longer, studying the tiny handwriting that once made me feel chosen. Then, gently, I pulled each one down. By the time I reached the hallway closet, my movements had become ritual, a slow undoing. I found the suit he wore to his first job interview, the tie I'd ironed at dawn so he'd look professional. The faint smell of starch and youth clung to the fabric. I folded it carefully, placed it into a donation box. In the corner of the closet sat a cardboard box marked keepsakes. Inside, ticket stubs, report cards, a paper heart glued to red construction paper with the words, "You are my sunshine," written in crayon. I held it for a long time, the edges soft from years of being handled. Then I whispered, wasn't I? And set it back. When I'd finished, I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by boxes, not of loss, but of release. For 62 years, I had built my identity around being someone's mother, someone's provider, someone's background. And now, in the stillness of that empty house, I felt the shape of something new forming in its place, the quiet outline of a woman reclaiming her space. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let the silence settle. It didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. From the window, I could see the roses in the garden, still wet from morning rain. The petals glowed under the porch light, each bloom opening toward the darkness without apology. I realized then that healing doesn't always arrive like thunder or applause. Sometimes, it's as simple as breathing in your own house and knowing it's finally yours. I hadn't planned on posting anything. For days, I'd ignored every vibration from my phone, every message blinking red with someone else's urgency. But one afternoon, I walked past the pile of receipts on my desk, the proof of every dollar, every unspoken sacrifice, and I felt a pulse of calm so sharp it almost hurt. I took a photo of the check, the one I'd written to cover the entire wedding bill. I blurred the account number, left my signature visible, and posted it on Facebook with no caption. No anger, no explanation, just truth. Within an hour, the notifications started. Old colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some comments were confused. What happened? Are you okay? Others, though mostly women, understood immediately. This broke my heart. We see you, Nora. You did everything right. It wasn't revenge. It was release. A final, quiet acknowledgement that I'd been erased by people I loved and that I wasn't going to vanish without a trace. Then came the calls again. Daniel first, dozens of missed attempts, then Emily, then Susan. When I finally turned the phone over, their words stacked on the screen like ghosts trapped in a machine. Daniel, Mom, why would you do that? People are asking questions. Emily, that was unnecessary and cruel. It makes you look bitter. Susan, we're disappointed. I expected better from someone your age. I didn't reply. Silence, I realized, had power. Every minute I didn't explain myself, their confusion grew heavier, their guilt sharper. Later that evening, a knock sounded at the door. I didn't answer. Through the peephole, I saw a bouquet of carnations, cheap ones, already wilting left on the porch without a card. I didn't bring them inside. I watched through the glass as the wind bent their stems, and by morning, they were gone. The next day, at the market, I ran into Diane, my cousin, who'd been at the wedding. She hesitated before speaking, her voice hushed. Nora, I just wanted to say, I didn't realize you were sitting back there on purpose. I thought maybe you preferred it quiet. I looked at her for a long moment. And you didn't ask, I said gently. She nodded, shame flooding her cheeks. I'm sorry, it was wrong. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Because sometimes, even a small truth spoken aloud is a kind of grace. That night, I made tea and sat by the window. Outside, the street was washed in moonlight, the world hushed. For the first time in weeks, my silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like a boundary, a sanctuary, and in that silence, I heard the faintest whisper of something new. Not the echo of what I'd lost, but the promise of what I was finally ready to build. It started with a list. Not a guest list, the way brides make them, no cursive headers or golden envelopes, just a lined yellow notepad and the sound of my pen scratching across it. I wrote the names slowly, one by one. Claire, the nurse who once covered my shift when I fell asleep in the supply closet. Mr. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who always cleared my sidewalk before I woke. Dina, the woman at the bookstore who saved my favorite novels behind the counter. Janet, my former supervisor who sent me soup when I broke my wrist. None of them were family by blood, but all of them, in quiet ways, had seen me. That realization made my chest ache, not from sadness, but from recognition. So I decided to cook, not as a hostess desperate to impress, but as a woman reclaiming her table. The market smelled of basil and rain. I bought what I loved: ripe heirloom tomatoes, garlic heads with papery skin, a loaf of sourdough still warm from the oven. At the last stall, I found sunflowers, their petals a little frayed, their stems thick and sturdy. I took them home anyway. Imperfect things had their own beauty. The next morning, I woke early, tied my hair back, and turned on the radio. Van Morrison's Someone Like You played softly as I chopped and stirred. The kitchen filled with the scent of lemon zest and butter, a fragrance that smelled like hope. By 6, my house was alive again. Claire arrived first, holding a bottle of red wine. You look radiant, she said, and I laughed, not because it was true, but because for the first time in years, I wanted it to be. Mr. Henderson came next, carrying a pie that leaned slightly to one side. Don't judge the crust, he said, and I promised I wouldn't. When everyone was seated, I looked around the table at the chipped plates, the mismatched glasses, the flickering candle in an old mason jar, and felt something shift. It wasn't grandeur, it was belonging. Laughter bubbled up like music. They shared stories, small, tender things about stubborn dogs and broken washing machines. Someone told a joke about growing old, and I laughed so hard I had to press a hand to my chest. Somewhere between the roasted vegetables and the pie, Claire lifted her glass. To Nora, she said, for remembering that it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table. The others murmured and raised their glasses too. The candlelight caught the wet shimmer in my eyes, and I didn't hide it. I stood, feeling the warmth of the room wrap around me like a shawl. "To all of us," I said softly. "To the women who gave everything and were told it still wasn't enough. To the ones who stayed quiet too long. May we never sit behind a door again." We clinked our glasses, the sound small and perfect. As the night settled, I looked around the room at these people who owed me nothing, yet came anyway, and realized I was no longer the woman who waited for acknowledgement. I was the woman who created it. Later, after everyone had gone and the dishes were drying in the rack, I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like rain and rosemary. The stars hung bright and unbothered. Inside, my dining table gleamed faintly in the light from the window, not empty, but full of something that had no name. Peace, perhaps, or reclamation, or both. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for a knock at the door. I was already home. It came a week later, when the evening light had just begun to thin and the shadows stretched long across the porch. 3 slow knocks measured, familiar. I knew before I opened the door. Through the frosted glass, his outline wavered. Shoulders slumped, head bowed slightly forward like a boy caught sneaking home past curfew. When I finally turned the handle, Daniel stood there, thinner than I remembered, the glow from the wedding replaced by exhaustion. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice small. I didn't say it back. I stepped aside, silent, and let him in. The house smelled of lemon and clean linen. Sunlight still lingered on the hardwood floors, spilling over the empty spaces where his photographs once hung. He noticed immediately. His gaze swept the walls, the mantel, the gaps that used to hold his history. "Where are the pictures?" he asked. "Packed away," I replied. He hesitated, then sank into the same armchair where he'd once sat as a teenager, sulking after curfew. Now he looked older, humbled, but still carrying the same restless defensiveness that had always flared when I said no. I stayed standing. "I didn't come here to fight," he said finally, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't understand what happened. One minute everything was fine, and then..." "Fine?" I cut in softly. "Daniel, you watched me sit by the kitchen door at your wedding." His eyes flicked up, startled. "I didn't know they'd..." "Yes, you did." My voice stayed even. "You saw. You chose silence." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Emily said the seating was for the theme. For the pictures. She thought it would look better." I let out a small, hollow laugh. "And you agreed, because a theme mattered more than your mother." The air between us tightened. He shifted in the chair. "I didn't think it would hurt you like that." "No," I said, "you didn't think at all." I crossed the room, retrieved a small box from the hallway closet, and set it down in front of him. Inside were the wedding receipts, the deposits, the upgrades, the 5-tier cake, the extra lighting, the band. Every dollar, every line item, neatly documented. "These," I said, "are the pieces of your perfect day." He stared at the papers but didn't touch them. Then I took out the red folder, thinner now, worn at the edges, and placed it beside the box. "And this," I said, "is the truth your father left behind." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What is that?" "Letters," I said. "You should read them." He hesitated, then unfolded the first one. I watched his face as his eyes moved down the page, confusion at first, then disbelief, then a kind of silent breaking that mirrored my own from nights ago. When he finished, he looked up, his mouth slightly open. "You knew?" "I do now," I said quietly. His voice cracked. "So you're angry because I'm not really your..." "No." I stepped closer, my tone steady. "I'm not angry that you weren't born from me. I'm angry that after everything I gave, you let them treat me like I never existed." He swallowed hard. I didn't know what to do. "You do now." The clock on the mantel ticked softly, filling the silence. Outside, cicadas began their evening chorus life carrying on, indifferent to the unraveling inside these walls. After a long moment, Daniel exhaled. "I'm sorry." I believed that he meant it, but I also knew it was too late. Apologies are only bridges if the other side is still standing. Mine had already burned, quietly, on the night of his wedding. I closed the folder, handed it to him along with the box. "These are yours now," I said. "Every receipt, every truth, every reminder of what you chose to overlook." He didn't move to take them at first. His eyes glistened, unsure. "Mom!" "No," I said softly, shaking my head. Not this time. You've had my whole life. I'm keeping the rest for me. Finally, he stood. His hands trembled as he took the box. He paused at the door, turning to look at me like a man searching for a version of his mother that might still open her arms. You always said I was your world, he whispered. You were, I said, and now I'm mine. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, I leaned against it, breathing in the still air he left behind. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't ache. Through the window, I saw him walk to his car, shoulders hunched, the red folder tucked under his arm. The evening light caught his face for just a second, a boy, a man, a stranger. Then he was gone. Inside, the house hummed with a peace that felt earned. That night, the house didn't feel empty. It felt ready. I opened the windows. The air rolled in warm, floral, alive. The scent of rosemary from the garden mingled with something new, lemon, butter, and bread. My table was set again, not with formality, but with care. The sunflower tablecloth glowed gold in the candlelight. The guests began to arrive. Claire knocked first, holding another bottle of wine and that same radiant smile. Mr. Henderson followed, balancing his infamous crooked pie. Then came Dina and Janet, their laughter spilling in before they did. They filled the house easily, as though they'd always belonged here. Their voices blended with the soft music humming from the radio, a Norah Jones song about second chances and quiet courage. When everyone had found a seat, I stood for a moment at the head of the table, just watching, the way candlelight softened the lines on their faces, the way the conversation lifted and swelled like a tide, the way these simple moments of connection felt like the most extraordinary gift. I sat down, and the world seemed to exhale. We ate until the plates were empty, talked until the candles burned low. Claire teased Mr. Henderson about his lopsided crust, and he swore it was artistic expression. Laughter roared through the room, the kind that shakes the walls and leaves an ache in your cheeks. At one point, Janet turned to me and said quietly, "You seem lighter, Norah." I smiled. I am. Because I was. Every piece of me that had been bent to fit inside someone else's story had straightened, expanded, reclaimed its space. After dessert, Claire lifted her glass. "To Norah," she said, eyes glinting, "for teaching us it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table." The others joined in. I felt my throat tighten, but my smile didn't falter. I raised my glass, too. "To the women who gave everything and were told it still wasn't enough," I said softly. "To the ones who stayed quiet too long, may we never sit behind a door again, and may we never apologize for taking up space." The sound of clinking glasses filled the air, small, steady, triumphant. After they left, I stood alone in the kitchen, barefoot, the floor cool against my skin. I looked around at the empty plates, the flicker of dying candles, the wine stains on the tablecloth, and felt nothing but gratitude. For the chaos, for the silence that followed it, for the woman I had become in the ruins of what was taken from me. Outside, the garden was glowing. The roses leaned into the night breeze, petals trembling in soft surrender. I poured myself one last glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, full, and gentle, painting everything in silver. Somewhere far off, a train passed a sound of distance and motion, reminding me that life always moves forward. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't chasing after it. I was already where I was meant to be. I sat down, not behind a door, not outside someone else's joy, but at the head of my own life's table, and it was enough.